My name is Justine. I'm an adult child. Thank you, everybody, for coming, first of all. Today has been, so far, an extremely powerful day for me, so much so that I didn't have any opportunity to feel nervous about speaking. I've spoken at so many meetings, so some of this might be familiar to some people. My parents met in high school. My mother spent most of her senior year pregnant with me, and I spent the first 3 months of my life in foster care until somebody in my family, depending on who's telling the story, convinced my no good, rotten, lazy SOB of a father, that part's consistent among all the stories, to marry my mother. And within a year, my mom was living in the streets, shooting heroin. My father, don't know. And I was dumped on the doorstep of my then 68-year-old great-grandmother, where I lived for the first 10 or 11 years of my life. I grew up knowing that I was a mistake, that I hadn't been wanted, that I was not loved, that I was not lovable, that if I were a different kid or a better kid or a smarter kid or a prettier kid, my parents wouldn't have left. And I carried that with me all through my life. In school, I was a smart kid in ill-fitting hand-me-downs and like $3 Kmart sneakers, so real popular. I carried that isolation with me also. And only recently have made peace with the fact that I enjoy solitude. I don't see that part of myself as, proof that I'm a loser anymore. Maybe what's helped that is that I have some people in my life now that I treasure, and I have been able to let everybody else's opinions go. I went off to college a year early and dropped out because of a boy. When I was 19, I was living in the Berkshire Mountains in Massachusetts, great town. I picked up a hitchhiker and I was raped at knife point. And my memories of, not the event itself, but the ensuing crap, very fuzzy. But somehow, because I did not want to go to the rape survivors group and talk about it, I ended up in an ACOA meeting. This was 1986. Now you know how old I am. There was no literature. There were no books. I don't remember like flyers or pamphlets or anything. We were encouraged to share. We were encouraged to work the 12 steps of Alcoholics Anonymous. Very little guidance, no idea what I was doing. I had no problem with step 1. Clearly my life was completely unmanageable. I didn't really believe it could be any other way. I did not believe that I deserved anything better. So I kind of bumped right over that. Surrendering my will, if I'm not in control, then it's going to get worse, isn't it? And coming to believe I had a lot of trouble with. I knew what I did not believe, and I had kind of I was 19. I had kind of a shamanic, pagan, druid, tree-hugging thing going on. I carry a lot of that with me today. A little bit less New Age than back then. I gave my 5th step to a guy, because there was always a guy. And 2 months later, or thereabouts, he threw it back in my face as an excuse to dump me. And so I dumped program, because, you get dumped, you gotta dump somebody, right? and screw this crap, and this isn't working, and I'm blah, blah, blah. And clearly, I just wasn't finished screwing up my life. I wasn't well enough to start getting well. When I was 22, I got pregnant. I was not married. And I moved to Boston and had a baby alone. When she was about 6 months old, a friend of mine from Long Island, that's where I'm from, came up to visit. And when she went back home, I went with her. Figured I'd spend a couple days in New York. There was a guy. Except she, that night, the night that we got back, we got in late. She dropped me off on her parents' couch and went to spend the night with her boyfriend. She had a guy. And about an hour after we got there, my daughter, who had slept for 4 hours in the car, woke up screaming and screamed and screamed and cried and screamed. And I walked and I bounced and I jiggled and I patted and I begged and I was 22 and alone in a stranger's home. And I was so screwed up that I was more fearful that these strangers would wake up and object to the disturbance in their home at that hour and become angry with me than I was concerned with my daughter's welfare. And for me, fear goes to anger most often. And I yelled. And I told her I hated her. And when I woke up the next day, she was dead. The autopsy showed SIDS, but I knew for years, and still somewhere in the back of my head, I knew I had killed her by not wanting her, by not being a good mother, by being so wrong and so broken that I didn't deserve her. I carried that with me for forever, and there is still a piece of it that rears its head on her birthday or the anniversary of her death, and it's been 29 years. I moved back to New York after she died, and I proceeded to drink and drug myself daily. I heard it said in a meeting once, somebody said, I wasn't an alcoholic, but I sure tried. And that was me. I drank every day. I used drugs every night. I think I wanted to die, and I was too... I'm going to go with a mixture of cowardice and hope. Because I think if you really want to go, you're going to go. I met a guy during that time, and he was kind of a bad guy. You know, he threw money around the bar, and he was all kind of tough. And I thought, and my excuse today is I drank a lot back then. I thought that he was going to save me, that he was strong, and he was going to take over, and somehow everything that was wrong in my world was magically going to be fixed. By the time we had our first child, I had no friends that weren't also his friends. I wasn't allowed to see most of my family. He wouldn't let me go to my father's funeral because there was going to be somebody there that I had slept with 2 years before I met him. He was controlling and manipulative and violent and abusive in every way. And I took it. I heard the messages coming from him that reinforced what I was told as a child. He used to, 60 pounds ago, call me fat, stupid, tell me that nobody else, when we fought, tell me that nobody else would ever want me, even my own family hadn't wanted me. So again, all the things I confided in him, he threw back at me. And I kind of bought into it. By the time our third child was born, I sang Nicholas to sleep with rock songs about breakups and suicide. And when my youngest was 2 years old, I came home from work one night later than he thought I should have. And he threatened to kill me. And I took my keys and my purse and I left. I was so messed up. I lost my kids. I lost custody of my 3 kids because he hadn't worked in, 10 years at that point. And so they lived with him. My daughter didn't speak to me for 5 years. I had to completely dissociate from my identity as a parent to get through like bedtime. Don't know how their day was, can't kiss them goodnight, can't tell them I love them, can't. I had been like, through all that misery, I had been the PTA mom. The cupcakes and class trip, and I taught art classes and computer classes at their dinky little school, and it was just gone. It was all gone. I got almost none of my clothing. My books were taped together when I got them back. If you know anything about me, you know what a horrible thing that is. I love my books. I got no furniture. I got no family. The home that I created was just gone. I spent 3 days in a hotel trying to convince myself not to go back. And then I got an apartment, and I handled my divorce the way I had handled my marriage. I thought, if I am good enough and quiet enough, then he will just be okay. And magically, this is going to work itself out. And I got to tell you, eventually it did. I have good relationships with all 3 of my kids now. 2 of them don't talk to him. They are angry with him, and I have waited for years for the other shoe to drop and for them to realize that I was complicit as well. But I had a conversation with my daughter when she visited last week. I get the impression that my kids see me as a co-victim rather than as a perpetrator. And I don't know if that's going to change, and one day there will be a reckoning, but I'm ready for it. I've made amends to all 3 of my kids. The youngest one in less detail, he's still only 16. And he doesn't remember any of the crap that went on. So my amends to him has been mostly apologizing for not having been there, you know. So when my daughter was 22-ish, the 56-year-old man she was dating decided to dump her, and she spent 2 or 3 months on my couch, like, you know, it was awful. And she wouldn't go to counseling. And I thought, I'm going to see if I can find an ACA meeting. And that wasn't because, obviously, because I had benefited so much from the program, but because I recognized her father as an alcoholic. I was the definition of dysfunctional as a parent and as a person. And I thought maybe she'd get something out of it. And so I drove her to the meeting and I brought knitting or a book or something. And she asked me to come in, which I thought was ridiculous, because how are you going to talk shit about me if I'm sitting next to you? You know, that's not going to work. And so this was Liberty Corner. And she went to 4 or 5 meetings. And when I finally put my foot down and said, listen, get a job, go back to school, do something. You can't just sit on the couch. Within 3 days, she had a place to live in Florida and a job lined up and a whatever. And I kept going to meetings. I was so miserable the first 4 to 6 months in program. I was so deep in denial that all of those layers, it was utter misery. Trying to summon any kind of honesty about myself, any kind of self-examination was really painful. And then it just changed. It just changed. I started to share at meetings instead of sitting there and spending so long thinking about, well, maybe I want to say this, but maybe that's not the right thing to say, and maybe I should say it this way, and nobody's going to whatever. And then somebody else would speak, and I'd go, and then it would start over again, the next silence. I did that for months. I went through a lot of tissues, but I didn't say a word. I started step work. There was nobody available to sponsor in that group at the time. I started step work with a couple of women from that meeting, and it was different. And I'm sure that part of that is that I had fellow travelers to work with, where I had been kind of winging it, you know, as a kid. And maybe I was a little more ready, although I kind of had to drag myself kicking and screaming through some of it. When I did my fourth step, I was able to find some compassion for myself and for my mom. That was the beginning of it anyway. I didn't forgive my mom until about a year later, but it really changed me. It started to open my heart. And when I did my 9th step amends to myself, I think that was the first conscious act of self-parenting that I committed. It was an incredibly powerful experience for me. I came into this program going, inner child, hokey bullshit, right? And then I realized you have to shut the critical parent off before you can approach your inner child, because of the wounds and because it's just more of the same to that child inside. It's, you know, I did a self-parenting workshop, and one of the things that I said was, imagine if we spoke to ourselves the way we speak to those we care for. And when I said it, I didn't even get it as much as I did later. I have to believe that giving service is part of what actually brought me to the beginnings of recovery. Because I gotta tell you, in the last 6 months, I feel it. People tell me they don't see progress and they don't think they're getting anywhere, and I tell them to stretch the timeline a little bit. Don't look at last month, look at 3 years ago, look at 10 years ago if you have to. There's progress. I see actual, real, physical, quantifiable changes in my relationships. And I really have only been able to see that and draw energy from that for the last 6 months. And what's changed for me in the last 6 months is that I've stepped up service. There's a saying that in service we find our program. And the knowledge that I can give back, first of all, to this program that has given so much to me, and to this community that has given me even more, but that I can do that from a place of love instead of, because I'm afraid if I don't do it, I won't be invited to the party, you won't like me, it'll prove I'm not good enough, I gotta do it and do it and do it and do everything and say yes all the time. It's not that way, and that truth energizes me. That knowledge gives me a lot of strength. What happened for me at some point, I did another 5th step. I went through it a 2nd time, and I started to do some 9th step work, and I did the same thing in my amends to myself that I had done before. And I found not just compassion, but love. And I think that it's made a huge difference. I'm a big reader of Scott Stabile and Brene Brown and Melody Beattie and, you know, and it's different. I spoke at a meeting a couple of years ago, and I said that I thought that I love you too was probably the biggest lie I've ever told. you hear, you can't love anybody else unless you love yourself. And I argued with that for years in here, because I never spoke up in case you weren't going to agree with me, and then I'd, be wrong. I love people, right? I love my friends, I love my family, I love my kids. I had no clue what I was doing. I would love you if you let me. I'll love you if you want me to. I'll love you if you're grateful enough. I'll love you if you recognize my sacrifice. I will love you if it doesn't hurt too much, even if it does. None of that's love. Love for me today is not so much a verb. It's not about what I should be doing for you. It's not about the undying gratitude I expect to get back, or the misery I'm going to feel when that doesn't happen. It's just, it's an expansion, it's an opening for me. It holds a mirror up. And finally, what I see is good stuff. Not all the time. I haven't turned into the Buddha. I'm not, I have shitty days and nasty moments, and I am a cranky person sometimes. But I try to carry love and to give love, even when, the 19th person of the hour approaches my desk. I say it at orientation, when I talk about respect for all people. I'm in HR, not a rescuer, right? I say, my position gives me the opportunity to learn about what a lot of the people in this building are going through. And that saying, be kind, everyone's carrying a heavy burden, it's true. Please don't assume that as a newcomer, if everybody doesn't walk up, smile, and shake in your hand, that they don't want you here, or you're doing a bad job, or they heard something nasty about you. There's a lot of people here that are struggling with things, but it's a good group. I can give myself that compassion now too, which is pretty cool. In the middle of all this stuff, I remarried. He's kind of the same guy I married before, which makes a lot of sense to me, because when I married him, I was kind of the same person. I've spent a lot of years begging him to stop drinking and threatening to leave and all this other stuff. And I don't want to say I don't care. His drinking is no longer my problem. And that's not just lip talk. I'm over it. I'm really over it. I'm not in control of his behavior. It's not my fault. And he told me last week that it was. And my response was, now it's my fault, not my son's? Because that was the last 3 years that he drank because my son was an addict. Now it's my fault. Apparently I don't validate him enough. Read, agree. I speak up when I think he's being hypocritical or passive-aggressive or cruel. He's very critical of my kids. And when he's drunk, he's very, very verbal about his criticism of my children. And I've actually thrown it in his face in sober moments. I'm not proud of it, but I have. I think I was trying to point out to him what a big problem he actually had. At one point, he decided it was the hard liquor. Beer's okay. 2 weeks later, there was a handle of Tanqueray on the refrigerator. Done. I enjoy him when he's sober. He's funny. He's generous with his time, and if I want to buy yarn, he sends me out to buy yarn. And he's a good guy. He's certainly not as invested in my children as I am. Kind of makes a little sense to me. When he's drunk, I say hello, and I go in the other room. And if he wants to yell and rail and vent, that's what he calls it, venting, which means, abusing me verbally for 20 minutes or more. He can do it by himself. Volume goes up on the TV. I hope he gets it someday. I really do. I don't know what the future of my marriage is if he doesn't. I can't imagine going on like this. The most important thing is that, for me, is that I recognize that it's not my fault, and that lets me keep working on me and not get dragged into the bullshit. I have a 24-year-old son who spent at least 2 years that I know of smoking heroin. He's got 2.5 years clean-ish. My definition of sobriety does not match his, but he's not using heroin anymore. I'm grateful. I enabled him, justified his behaviors, made excuses for him, paid his bills, bailed him out of jail the first time he got arrested, second time too. He got picked up a third time for failure to appear at a court date. He spent 12 days in jail. I had told him I wouldn't bail him out again, and I didn't. And I told him afterward when he confronted me that I had chosen not to help him. I had chosen to deal with his anger and my guilt and let him fall. And he went and lived in the woods for 3 months. I didn't see him again until August when he called and said, and he's living at home now. I actually had to tell my husband that he was my child and he was clean, and this is my home, and if my kid's not welcome here, I'll go find someplace else to live. I've been enmeshed in the last few years with my daughter. I feel like she is repeating my mistakes one after the other. There's so many parallels, it's terrifying. And I get drawn into that, and it does nobody any good. It really doesn't. I'm not as addicted to her drama anymore either. I gave up my Facebook account, and now I don't hear about it. She does the exact same thing with her fiance. They have 2 boys that I did with my husband. She tells me nothing about what goes on in the house. But I could tell through her Facebook account, the little passive-aggressive memes about, how you treat a woman when you respect her. And I know he drinks, and I know he stays out all night, and I know it's her choice. And I have let her know that she's got a home to come to, and that I will go out and pick her up if she needs me to. And that's it. That's all I can do, is let her know that, she's got some choices if she's strong enough to make them. And if I didn't love myself, I couldn't have done that. I don't know how much time I have, or if I've gone over or anything. I don't really have too much else to say. There's I think it's a Rumi quote, we're all just walking each other home. I am so incredibly grateful to be walking this path with all of you, with so many fantastic people, and to have found a home in this program and in this community. Thanks for listening. That's all I got.
Next up, we just want to say thank you to the organization that have financially supported the day of sharing this year, specifically the Intergroup, the Yardley PA Group, and Hillsborough, New Jersey. Thank you.
My name is Justine. I'm an adult child. Thank you, everybody, for coming, first of all. Today has been, so far, an extremely powerful day for me, so much so that I didn't have any opportunity to feel nervous about speaking. I've spoken at so many